The medical scanner beeped 3 times. In rapid succession, then it beeped. Again, then it began screaming, "Lyra, son!" Dropped the inventory tablet she had been holding and ran across the empty medical bay. The scanner was connected to absolutely nothing. It sat on a charging dock running its nightly self-diagnostic cycle. It should not be. Screaming, she reached for the device, just as her communicator crackled to life. Medical bay, emergency landing in progress. Docking base 7, unknown vessel, unknown species, single life. Sign detected, respond immediately. Lyra grabbed the scanner and a field kit. Without thinking, her training took over. She was the only medical staff on duty during the night cycle. Everyone else was asleep. Waypoint Station 47 was a quiet posting on the edge of collective space. Nothing ever happened here until now. She ran through the curved corridors, her scaled feet clicking against the cold metal floor. The station kept a comfortable temperature for its cold-blooded inhabitants, around 18 degrees C. Lyra had grown up in such environments. She had never known anything else. The docking bay doors opened to chaos. Emergency foam covered the floor where fire suppression systems had activated. A small cargo ship sat crooked on the landing pad, smoke rising from its damaged engine housing. The vessel had clearly come in too fast and too hard. Lyra approached carefully. The ship's hull was scorched, but intact, a standard freight hauler. Nothing special about its design. She found the emergency release for the cockpit hatch and pulled the hatch opened with a hiss of escaping atmosphere. Inside, she found the pilot. He was bipedal, roughly humanoid shape, but his skin was an odd pinkish tone she had never seen before. No scars, no cheating, no feathers, just smooth bare skin stretched over a muscular frame. He was slumped over the control console, blood running from a wound on his forehead. Lyra climbed into the cockpit and pressed her scanner against his chest. The device went insane. Warning symbols flashed across its screen. Critical hyperothermia, core temperature at 37.2 degrees C. Fatal fever detected. Immediate cooling required. Patient status terminal. Lyra stared at the readings. That cannot be right. 37 degrees would cook the organs of any species she knew. It would cause brain damage within minutes. No living creature could survive at such temperatures. She recalibrated the scanner and tried again. 37.1 degrees. She pulled out a backup scanner from her kit, a different model, different manufacturer. 37.3 degrees. The pilot groaned. Lyra nearly fell out of the cockpit. He was alive. He was conscious. His body was running hot, enough to kill any patient she had ever treated, and he was trying to sit up. Hold still, she said, her voice higher than she intended. You're injured. Do not move. The pilot blinked at her with strange round eyes. What happened? Did I make it? You crashed, Lyra said. Your ship is damaged. You are bleeding. And you are. She looked at the scanner. Again, you're very sick. Your temperature is extremely elevated. The pilot touched his forehead and winced at the blood on his fingers. Feels about normal to me, maybe a little cold. Actually, you guys keep it chilly in here. Lyra's mind refused to process his words. Cold. He thought this was cold. His body was a furnace. His internal organs should be failing. He should be dead or dying, not complaining about the temperature. I need to get you to the medical bay, she said. Can you walk? I Think so? He moved slowly, carefully. Testing his limbs. Nothing feels broken. Just banged up. Lyra helped him out of the cockpit the moment her hand touched his arm. She flinched backward. He was hot, not warm, hot. His skin burned against her cool scales like touching a heating element. She could feel the heat radiating off him in waves, a constant outpouring of thermal energy that made no biological sense. Sorry, he said. I run a bit warm, didn't mean to startle you. A bit warm, he called. This a bit warm. Lyra forced herself to take his arm again. She guided him out of the docking bay and through the corridors toward medical. Every step of the way she felt that impossible heat pressing against her. It was like walking beside a small Sui in the medical bay. She helped him onto an examination table. He sat there patiently while she ran more tests, of which returned the same impossible results. Core temperature stable at 37 degrees. Heart rate elevated but within acceptable parameters. Blood pressure normal. All organs functioning properly. That he was not dying. He was not even sick. This was simply what he was. What species are you? Lyra asked quietly. Pilot looked at her with those strained, soft eyes. Human, he said. Name's David. Webb, sorry about the rough landing. Engine failure, couldn't help it. Human. She had heard stories, distant rumors, exaggerated tales meant to frighten children, creatures from a death world who could survive anything, monsters with hot blood who ate poison for pleasure. She had never believed any of it. Lyra stood very still, her scanner clutched in her trembling hands, staring at the living impossibility before her. David Webb smiled at her, a gentle expression on his alien face. You okay? He asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. She had seen something worse than a ghost. She had seen a creature whose very existence violated everything she thought she knew about life. She had seen a human, Dr. Pushri. Van did not appreciate being woken in the middle of a night cycle. She made this very clear as she walked into the medical bay, her scales still dull from sleep, her eyes narrow with irritation. This had better be important, she said. I have a full schedule tomorrow, and I do not enjoy interruptions. Lyra stood beside the examination table where David Webb sat quietly. He had been patient throughout the past hour, answering questions when asked, staying calm despite the obvious confusion around him. Lyra appreciated his cooperation. She needed it now more than ever. Dr. Vin, she said carefully, I need you to look at these readings. The senior medical officer took the scanner. With obvious annoyance, she glanced at the screen, then she looked again more closely, then she looked at David. Your equipment is broken, she said. I used 3 different scanners, all gave the same results. Dr. Vin walked to the storage cabinet and pulled out a 4th scanner. She ran it over David herself, pressing the sensor against his chest, his neck, his forehead. Each time the readings came back the same. 37 degrees. 37 degrees. This is not possible, she said. That's what I kept telling myself, Lyra replied. The doctor then circled David slowly, studying him like specimen. He remained still, allowing the examination, though. Lyra noticed his shoulders had tensed slightly. UTC demanded. Human said from Earth. I'm guessing you haven't met one of us before. I have not met any species with this biology before. Dr. Vin turned to Lyra. Search the collective medical database. Look for any reference to this Earth or these humans. Lyra moved to the terminal and began searching. The collective database contained information on over 200 known species. Surely there would be something. She found very little. The file on humans was sparse and heavily redacted. Most of the information was classified above her clearance level, but one section remained visible, a preliminary contact report from decades earlier. Here, Lyra said baseline human body temperature 36.1 to 37.2 degrees. See, it says this is normal for them, Dr. Vin read the file over her shoulder. Her scales had gone pale, a sign of shock. Among their species, normal. They maintained this temperature constantly. Apparently, yes, the caloric requirements alone would be staggering. They would need to eat constantly just to maintain such heat output. David cleared his throat. We eat about 3 times a day usually, sometimes more if we're active. Both Velith women turned to stare at him. 3 times a day, Dr. Van repeated, and this sustains you. Mostly snacks help. Dr. Vin returned to the database, pulling up additional files. What she found made her scales go even paler. She found information about Earth itself, the human home world. Data was incomplete, but what existed was disturbing. This planet has extreme temperature variations, she said, from degrees to positive 50 degrees. In different regions, the gravity is significantly higher than collective standard. The atmosphere contains 21% oxygen. That sound about right, David said. Oxygen is corrosive. It damages cellular structures over time. Yeah, it does. We call that aging. Lyra felt dizzy. She had studied xenobiology for years. She had learned that life adapted to its environment in logical, predictable ways. Cold-blooded species developed on cold worlds. Warm-blooded species were rare and typically maintained temperatures only slightly above ambient. Nothing in her education had prepared her for this. A species that ran hot enough to cook themselves. A species that breathed corrosive gas. Species from a world that seemed designed to kill anything living on it. How do you survive? She asked. David shrugged. We're stubborn. I guess humans are good at not dying. Dr. Hervin pulled up more files. Predator lists from Earth. Lyra saw creatures with teeth longer than her forearm, swimming. Animals large enough to swallow a person whole. Insects that injected venom. Plants that produce poison. Even the bacteria could kill. Your world is a death trap, Dr. Vince said. It has its challenges, David admitted, but it's home. Lots of nice parts too. Beaches, mountains, forests full of predators, some of them. Sure, you learn to be careful. Lyra looked at David with new understanding. He was not just an alien. He was a survivor of a world that should not produce survivors. His burning temperature was not a defect or a disease. It was an adaptation, a biological furnace that kept him alive in conditions that would kill any other species in the collective. That he was impossible, and yet here he sat bleeding slightly from a head wound, asking politely if someone could please bring him some water because his throat was dry. I will need to report this to Administrator Gel. Dr. Van said, this is beyond standard medical protocols. Am I in trouble? David asked. Lyra found herself answering before Dr. Van could. No, you're not in trouble. You're just very different for what we expected. David smiled at her. It was a warm expression, friendly and open. I get that a lot, he said. Don't worry, I'm not dangerous, I'm just a cargo pilot. Having a really bad week, Lyra believed. She was not sure why. Perhaps it was the calmness in his voice, perhaps it was the way he had endured there. Prodding and questioning without complaint, perhaps it was simply the fact that any creature capable of surviving Earth probably had very little reason to harm two confused medical officers on a tiny space station. Whatever the reason, she believed him. She just was not sure the rest of the station would feel the same way. 73. Messages waited in the station. Communication queue by the time the day cycle began, word had spread fast. Human had arrived at Waypoint Station. 47. Lyra had not slept. She had spent the remaining hours of the night monitoring David's vital signs, watching his impossible temperature hold steady at 37 degrees, and trying to understand how any of this was real. David had slept. He had simply closed his eyes, lowered his breathing rate, and drifted into unconsciousness for several hours. Had watched his body temperature actually drop slightly during sleep down to 36.4 degrees. This was apparently normal for humans. Their bodies cooled slightly during rest, then heated back upon waking. When he opened his eyes and sat up, stretching muscles that rippled beneath his thin skin, Lyra felt the heat radiating from him immediately. His body had returned to its full burning state. Within minutes, morning, he said, or whatever time it is here. Sorry, crash. Ships don't keep great schedules. Is the day cycle, Lyra said. You slept for 5 hours. Not bad for sleeping on a medical table. He looked around the room. Any chance I could get some food? I'm pretty hungry. This presented a problem. The station's food supplies were designed for digestive systems. Lyra had no idea what a human could safely eat. What do you normally consume? She asked. Honestly, I'm not picky. Meat, plants, grains, whatever. Humans can eat pretty much anything organic. Some things don't agree with us, but we can usually tell. Lyra brought him a selection of items from the station kitchen, some protein blocks, some dried vegetables, a container of preserved fruit. She had no idea if any of it would be edible for him. David examined each item, smelling them carefully. He set aside the protein blocks. Those have something in them that smells off. Probably fine for you, but might upset my stomach. He picked up the fruit. This looks good, though. He ate the entire container in minutes, then he ate half the vegetables. Lyra watched in fascination as his jaw worked, his teeth tearing through the food with an efficiency that suggested powerful bite force. Humans have different teeth for different purposes, he explained when he noticed her staring. Front ones for biting, back ones for grinding. What's called omnivores. We eat everything. Everything within reason. We can't digest cellulose like some herbivores. And some things are toxic, but generally speaking, if it's organic and we can chew it, we can probably eat it. More staff members began appearing throughout the day. They came with excuses. Equipment checks, supply deliveries, routine inspections that had never been routine before. Lyra knew they were coming to see the human. David handled the attention with patience. He answered questions. He let them scan him. He showed them his hands, his feet, his teeth. He was like an exhibit in a museum, and he seemed to accept this role without complaint. Do all humans travel alone? One technician asked. No. Most don't. I prefer it. gives me time to think. Are you not afraid? Space is dangerous. David considered this. I suppose I am sometimes. Fear keeps you sharp, but humans have been exploring dangerous places since we first climbed down for trees. It's kind of what we do. You climb down from trees. Long time ago, our ancestors lived in forests. Then some of them moved to open ground. Then they spread everywhere, deserts, mountains, frozen plains. Anywhere there was land, humans eventually showed up. Lyra listened to these conversations. Throughout the day, each answer raised more questions. Humans had colonized every environment on their deadly home world. They had survived ice ages and volcanic eruptions. They had hunted animals larger than themselves into extinction, and now they were spreading into space. David was proof of that. One human alone piloting a cargo ship through regions that most species considered too remote and dangerous to bother with. By evening, Lyra noticed something. David was shivering slightly. Are you cold? She asked. He looked embarrassed a little. Sorry, I'm used to warmer environments. This temperature is fine for working, but sitting still for hours. He rubbed his arms. My body keeps trying to heat up, but the room keeps pulling it away. Lyra had never considered this. The station's temperature was lethal in the wrong direction for him. He was not in danger of overheating. He was in danger of losing too much heat to the environment. His body was constantly burning fuel to maintain itself, and the cold station was making that process harder. She found a thermal blanket in storage. It was designed for patients recovering from hypothermia, rarely used on this station. She handed it to David. He wrapped it around his shoulders. Gratefully, thanks, this helps a lot. I did not realize our temperature would be uncomfortable for you. It's not dangerous or anything, just tiring. My body has to work harder to stay warm. He pulled the blanket tighter. On Earth we have places much colder than this. Humans live there too. They just wear more clothes and build warmer shelters. You adapt, we adapt, he agreed. It's pretty much our only real skill. Humans aren't the strongest or fastest species. We're not the smartest probably, but we're very good at figuring out how to survive in places we shouldn't be. Lyra sat down across from him. The heat coming off his body was noticeable even from a distance. It was less frightening now than it had been the night before. It was simply what he was, a creature designed to burn. Why do you do it? She asked. Why travel to these remote places? Why take these risks? David thought about this for a long moment. Because someone has to, he said. Finally, because there are things out here worth seeing. Because staying safe and comfortable in one place forever sounds like a slower kind of death. He smiled at her, and despite everything she knew about what he was, she found herself smiling back. You are a very strange species, she said. Yeah, David agreed. We really are. Administrator Grell arrived at the medical bay precisely on time. The Maury van insectoid moved with careful efficiency, each of his 6 legs clicking against the floor in a measured rhythm. His compound eyes surveyed the room, taking in everything at once. David sat on the examination table, the thermal blanket still around his shoulders. Lyra stood nearby, having been asked to attend as the medical officer on record. Dr. Pushy Van had declined to participate, claiming other responsibilities, though Lyra suspected she simply did not want to deal with the Paperwork, Mr. Webb. Administrator Grell said I am required to conduct an assessment before you can move freely on this station. Standard protocol for unregistered species contact. You understand? Of course, David said. Ask whatever you need. The questions began. Simple things at first. Name, origin, profession, purpose for traveling through this sector. David answered each one directly and honestly. He was a cargo pilot, independent contractor. He hauled supplies between remote outposts that larger shipping companies did not want to bother with dangerous work. Administrator Grell observed, sometimes pays well though, and I like the quiet. You prefer isolation, not isolation. Exactly, just space, room to think. Humans can be overwhelming in large groups. We're social creatures, but we also need time alone. Administrator Grell made notes on his tablet. His antenna twitched as he processed information. Your species is relatively new to interstellar travel. We've only been at it for a few generations, still learning the rules, and yet you travel alone into remote regions. Most young species stay closer to established roots. David shrugged. Someone has to make the first trips. Might as well be me. The questions continued. Administrator Grell asked about human society. David described their governments, their conflicts, their achievements. He spoke about art and music and literature. He explained that humans had thousands of different cultures, different languages, different ways of living. You are not unified. Administrator Grell asked. Not completely. We agree on some things, disagree on others. We've been arguing with each other since we first learned to talk. This seems inefficient. Probably is, but it's also how we improve. Someone has an idea, others challenge it. Eventually the good ideas survive and the bad ones fade away. It's messy, but it works. Lyra found herself fascinated by this description. Vila's society was much more orderly. Consensus was valued. Disagreement was rare and usually private. The human approach sounded chaotic, even dangerous, and yet David described it as a strength. Administrator Grell finally set down his tablet. I find no evidence that you pose a threat to this station, he said. Species is unusual, but unusual is not the same as dangerous. Thank you, David said. However, I must ask, your biology is concerning to many here. Your temperature alone has caused significant anxiety among my staff. How do you suggest we address this? David thought for a moment. Honestly, I think the best approach is just letting people get used. To me, fear comes from not understanding. The more they see that I'm just a person trying to get by, the less scary I'll seem. A reasonable approach. Administrator Grell stood. You may move about the station freely, Mr. Webb. Please do not enter restricted areas, and please report any medical issues immediately. After the administrator left, Lyra let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. The interview had gone well. David had been calm and reasonable throughout. Noits, no deans, just a tired pilot answering questions. You handle that well, she said. Practice, David replied. This isn't my first time being the weird alien in the room. Does it bother you being feared? David considered this. Sometimes. Mostly I understand it though. Humans can be scary. We're from a scary world. We've done scary things throughout our history. He paused. But we've also done amazing things. Built cities, created Art traveled to the stars, being capable of destruction doesn't mean that's all you're capable of. Lyra sat down beside him. The heat from his body was intense this close, but she was growing accustomed to it. Do you find us frightening, you cold-blooded species? We are very different from you, David smiled. Honestly, I find you beautiful. The way your scales catch the light, the efficiency of your movements, you're perfectly adapted to your environment. Humans had to become furnaces just to survive. You found a more elegant solution. We did not choose it. Evolution made us this way. Same with us. We're all just products of our worlds. David adjusted his blanket. Maybe that's why I like traveling so much, getting to see all the different ways life figured out how to exist. It's humbling, makes you realize humans aren't the center of anything. We're just one more experiment. An alarm suddenly blared through the station. Red lights flashed in the corridors outside. Lyra jumped to her feet, her scales prickling with instinctive fear. Emergency alert, the station computer announced heating system failure in Section 7, temperature dropping rapidly. 3 personnel trapped, medical assistance required. Lyra looked at David. David looked at the door. What's the temperature going to drop to? He asked without heeding that section. We'll reach degrees within 20 minutes. That's fatal for your species. Below 10 degrees causes hypothermic shock. Below 5 causes permanent damage. Below 0. She did not finish. David stood up and pulled off his blanket. Then we need to move. Now, the corridor to Section 7 grew colder with every step. Lyra could feel it in her bones. A creeping numbness that slowed her thoughts and stiffened her muscles. Her breath came out in visible clouds. David walked beside her. He wore only the simple medical gown he had been given after his arrival. No thermal protection, no Sebastian, just thin fabric against his bare skin, but he seemed fine. How cold is it now? He asked. Lyra checked her handheld scanner. 12 degrees, dropping steadily. That's not bad. Little chilly but manageable. Rescue team had tried to reach the trap personnel from the main access corridor. A secondary system failure had sealed the emergency bulkheads. They were cutting through, but it would take at least 30 minutes. The trap technicians did not have 30 minutes. The only other route was through a maintenance shaft. Too narrow for rescue equipment, too cold for any Vel to survive long enough to navigate, but not too cold for a human. You do not have to do this, Lyra said as they reached the maintenance access hatch. We can wait for the rescue team. David shook his head. You said they have maybe 20 minutes before permanent damage, 30 before death. Rescue team won't make it. He pulled open a hatch. A wave of freezing air rolled out. I can't. It is 8 degrees in there, dropping to below 0. I know. He looked at her with those strange soft eyes. On Earth people climb mountains. Where it drops to -40, they swim in frozen lakes for fun. Humans aren't built for comfort. We're built for survival. He climbed into the shaft. Before she could argue further, Lyra ran to the nearest observation window. She could see in a Section 7, a storage area, now filling with frost. 3 figures huddled together in the far corner. Young technicians barely out of training. Their movements were sluggish, their scales turning pale as their bodies began to shut down. She watched David emerge from the maintenance shaft. On the other side, he moved quickly, ignoring the cold that should have slowed him down. the temperature reading. On her scanner showed 4 degrees now, still. Dropping, David reached the technicians. Lyra could not hear what he said, but she saw him kneel beside them. He gathered the 3 of them close, wrapping his arms around them, pulling them against his body, his burning, impossible body, through the window. Lyra could see frost forming on David's hair and gown. His breath came out in thick clouds, but he did not stop. He held the technicians tight, pressing them against his chest, letting the furnace of his biology pour heat into their failing bodies. One of the technicians stirred, then another. They pressed closer to David instinctively, drawn to his warmth like cold-blooded creatures drawn to a sunrow. The 3rd technician was unconscious, but David held her too, refusing to let go. Minutes passed. Lyra watched the temperature continue to drop. 2 degrees, 1 degrees, 0. David was shivering now, even. His impossible biology had limits, but he did not release the technicians. He held them tighter, his body working harder, burning fuel faster, fighting to keep them alive. The rescue team broke through at the 15-minute mark. They rushed in Section 7 with heating units and thermal blankets. They found David on his knees, still holding the 3 technicians, still burning. "Get them warm," he said through chattering teeth. "They need heat." The rescue team took over. They wrapped the technicians in emergency blankets and rushed them to the medical bay. Lyra ran to meet them, her training taking over. All 3 technicians survived. Their core temperatures had dropped dangerously low, but David had kept them above the threshold for permanent damage. They would recover fully within a few days. David was another matter. He sat in the medical bay, wrapped in every thermal blanket Lyra could find. His skin had gone pale, an alarming sight on a creature usually so warm. His core temperature had dropped to 34 degrees. For a human, this was moderate hypothermia. "You could have died," Lyra said as she monitored his recovery. "Probably not. Humans are tough." He was still shivering, but less than before. Besides, it was worth it. 3 lives. For some discomfort, easy trade it was. More than discomfort, your body was failing. David looked at her. Despite the cold, despite the shivering, he managed to smile. "Lyra, I've been scared of being seen as a monster since I got here. My temperature freaks people out. My biology is wrong by every standard. You know," he pulled the blankets tighter. "This was the first time being what I'm actually help someone. I wasn't going to waste that." Lyra did not know what to say. She had spent 2 days thinking of David as an impossibility, a creature that should not exist. She had studied his biology with the detachment of scientists examining a specimen, but specimens did not risk their lives for strangers. Specimens did not hold dying people in their arms and refused to let go. Specimens did not smile through their own pain and call it an easy trade. David was not a specimen. He was not a monster. He was just a person, different in biology, but not in heart. "Your temperature is rising," she said. "Finally, you should be back to normal within a few hours." "Good, I'm looking forward to not feeling like an icicle." "Is that what cold feels like to you?" "Yeah, pretty much, like being stabbed with tiny frozen needles everywhere." He laughed weakly. "Your normal day is my emergency." Funny how that works. Funny was not the word Lyra would have chosen. Humbling perhaps, or enlightening. She had learned something important today. Something about humans, something about herself. Monsters were not defined by what they were defined by what they chose to do, and David Webb had chosen to be anything but monstrous. 3 days after the incident, David's ship was ready to fly again. The station engineers had worked overtime to repair the damaged engine. They had refused payment, they had refused thanks, they had simply done the work and walked away. Lyra understood why. The 3 technicians David had saved were well known on the station. Everyone had a friend or colleague among them. What David had done had spread through the station within hours. The strain burning alien had become something else entirely, a hero. The word felt strain when applied to someone who had terrified her just days before, but Lyra could not deny its accuracy. David had walked into freezing temperatures that would have killed any of them. He had used his impossible biology not as a weapon but as a shield. He had held dying strangers and refused to let them go. If that was not heroism, Lyra did not know what was. She found David in the docking bay doing final checks on his repaired ship. The small cargo vessel looked much better now, fresh welding marked where the hole had been damaged. New components gleamed in the engine housing. It would not win any beauty contests, but it would fly. Leaving already? She asked. David looked up and smiled. It was strange how his smile had become familiar so quickly. Got a delivery to make. Client's been waiting long enough. You could stay longer, rest more. Your body needs time to fully recover. My body's fine. Humans bounce back fast. It's another one of those survival traits. He closed an access panel and wiped his hands on his pants. Besides, staying still too long makes me restless. I need to keep moving. Lyra stepped closer. The heat radiating from his body was noticeable even at this distance. She no longer flinched from it. She had grown accustomed to his warmth, even found it somewhat comforting. I wanted to thank you, she said officially, for what you did. You don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same. No, they would not have. She met his eyes. No one else on the station could have survived those temperatures. Only you. You were the only one who could save them, and you did not hesitate. David seemed uncomfortable with the praise. He looked away, scratching the back of his neck. I just did what made sense. Seemed stupid to let people die when I could help. That is exactly what I mean. Lyra pulled a small device from her pocket. I have something for you, a copy of my report on your species. I thought you might want to see how you were documented. David took the device and scrolled through the text. His expression shifted as he read, moving from curiosity to surprise to something that might have been emotion. You wrote this? Yes, for the collective database, so that when other humans visit collective stations, the medical staff will know what to expect. David read a passage aloud. Human body temperature, while initially alarming, should be understood as a biological adaptation rather than a medical emergency. Humans are endothermic organisms evolved on a high-gravity death world with extreme environmental variation. Their internal heat generation is essential for survival and should not be treated as fever or illness. He looked up at her. This is actually really accurate. I had a good subject to study. David scrolled further. He reached the conclusion of the report and stopped reading aloud. But Lyra saw his lips moving as he processed the words she had written. Humans may appear frightening due to their biological differences, but initial fear should not overshadow their capacity for compassion and self-sacrifice. This medical officer's direct observation confirms that humans, despite their death world origins, are capable of profound kindness. They burn because their world demanded it. They protect because they choose to, perhaps. It is what makes them human. David was quiet for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were slightly wet. Lyra had learned that this indicated strong emotion in humans, though she was not entirely sure which emotion. Thank you, he said softly. This means a lot. It is simply the truth, maybe, but truth doesn't always get recorded. Sometimes fear wins out. He handed the device back to her. You chose to see past the fear. Not everyone does. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. The docking bay hummed with distant machinery. Other ships sat in their berths, waiting for crews that had not yet arrived. Will you come back this way again? Lyra asked. Probably. This route pays well and the company's good. He grinned. Plus now I know there's at least one station where they won't try to freeze my blood to cool me down. We would never do that. I know, that's why I'll come back. David climbed the boarding ramp to his ship. At the top, he turned and looked back at her. Light from the docking bay caught his face, highlighting features that had seemed so alien days ago and now seemed almost familiar. Hey Lyra, he called down. Yes, next time I visit maybe we can share a meal. I'll try some more of your fruit. You can ask me more questions about Earth. Make it a proper cultural exchange. Lyra felt her scales flush with warmth, a rare physical response for her species. I would like that. Good, it's a date. He waved once, then disappeared into his ship. Boarding ramp retracted. The engines powered up with a healthy roar that echoed through the docking bay. Lyra stepped back as the vessel lifted off, its navigation lights blinking in the standard departure sequence. She watched the ship exit through the atmospheric shield and disappear into the clear's throat, vast darkness of space. One small vessel carrying one impossible creature burning his way through a cold universe. Lyra returned to the medical bay. She had work to do, patients to treat, reports to file, the routine. A station life continued regardless of extraordinary events. But something had changed. She felt it in the way her colleagues looked at her, in the questions they asked about the human she had treated. Fear was slowly being replaced by curiosity. Horror was giving way to understanding. David Webb had crashed into their lives and left them different, better, perhaps more open to the impossible. She sat down at her terminal and began preparing for her next shift. Outside the window, stars burned in the endless dark. Somewhere among them, a human was flying home.